And hello there. Good morning. it's so simple, it's so succinct, and it evokes Gandalf in the best possible ways. Good morning, everyone. It is time for Torn Tuesday, but not really. This is Torn all day. TheOneRing.net is now continuing our ongoing audio music commentary. It's sort of like we're doing an audio commentary track for Howard Shore's wonderful, ebullient, and altogether just wildly good music that we have fallen in love with over the years with the Lord of the Rings score. We did the Hobbit trilogy not too long ago. And now thank you, everybody, our faithful audience, for joining us once again on the OneRing.net to continue. And we're now in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. It is time for the Return of the King, part 1. So everybody, you get to watch along with us. It's really quite simple. Take your disc, this one, put it in the player, and get it queued up and ready to begin, and we will press play together, synchronizing at the same time. And if you come into the broadcast later on YouTube or on Facebook, then we'll have a countdown clock. You can fast forward your movie and watch along with us by looking at the timer on the bottom of this display. And to my guests, to my wonderful guests, again, I say, good to see you guys. Welcome. We have Jim J. Ware and we have Doug Adams, the guys who work so hard on the music of the Lord of the Rings films and the music of the Hobbit films, which may or may not yet come to pass. But I'm sure it will. With all the energy we have, let me have my guests say a word. Welcome, gentlemen. Nice to have you.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Cliff. And we have looked in the mirror, and it will definitely come to pass. It's just a question of when.
Yes, awesome sauce. In the background, we have our co-host and producer Justin, very busy doing the technical stuff. Let us get ready, everybody. Start our countdown, and we will press play. If you're using Apple iTunes or a digital version of the film, just press play at the very beginning. You know, the New Line logo will appear, and we're going to start talking music. If you're using DVD or Blu-ray, that's the equal to the 4K UHD. It'll all work out fine. So, without further ado, we have many more wonderful musical themes and some wild climactic territory to cover. Let's begin. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, play.
Action.
And there we are.
Here we go. Roots and beginnings.
And this was not the first pass at this composition.
It was not indeed.
Well, that's because a lot of this material with Smeagol's history was at some point lodged over in the Two Towers, and it moved around a bit, right?
True, but I don't think it was ever scored until it became a part of the Return of the King. So the music was never applied in those earlier placements. But even as Jim says, this was scored a few different ways to sort of get that balance of, it begins with that sort of bucolic lightness before we get a hint of the ring, before we go back to a couple of very innocent seeming characters, Smeagol and Deagle. But the degree to which it was innocent and playful and bucolic was much debated for a while.
I think the original opening was maybe just a little too playful.
Yeah. So when I was in, I always feel like that's, oh, what a beautiful day there. Little Rodgers and Hammerstein. When I was in England for the Return of the King recording sessions, there was one day that they took me over to Abbey Road, a few floors higher than the actual studio or recording places. And they played me everything that they had finished recording and syncing to film at that point. And this was the first completed scene I ever saw. And I was completely blown away by just how much more complicated the music was becoming. So the kind of concept,
quite surprised to have this opening prologue for the film.
Yes, yeah, it's an amazing self-contained element. Here's our History of the Ring theme as we See that same shot of the ring? We always assumed that was Smeagol's hand, but it's Deagle's hand.
Right.
But the Return of the King is very much about bringing thematic content together. Fellowship of the Ring was establishing the world, Two Towers was expanding the world, and Return of the King is sort of unifying the world. If perhaps it'd be better to say unifying the quest or the mission or the plot. But musically, things start weaving together, which is a great way to bring it into focus.
Here we have the Seduction of the Ring again.
Yeah, Seduction of the Ring, a nice clear statement of it. Often the seduction theme was replaced by sound effects, by the ring sound effects. But here's a great statement where it's very, very clear, the boys' chorus.
It's somewhat unfortunate that the best first example of music coming together is not present in the final film.
No, but happily on the album it is.
Happily on the album, happily also in the live to projection performances if you're lucky enough to see one of those.
Yeah, seek those out. I do think they'll begin again when the world sort of gets back on its feet.
So as originally written, there's music that runs all through this fight sequence. And it essentially plays off all the ring themes against one another.
Oh.
Yeah, mostly the evil of the ring against the seduction of the ring.
Yeah. I think there's some sort of descending thirds in there as well.
Yes, yeah. But in terms of the ring themes themselves, you get sort of two of the principal. There's sort of three principal themes with a fourth sort of ancillary theme. But we will eventually get to the point where those will be combined, although again, you're gonna have to go to the album rather than to the film to hear it. But we'll talk about that tomorrow, I believe.
We will.
Yes, I would like to learn more about these distinct differences between what we are accustomed to hearing in the film versus what's on the album.
Well, this was another example of ring sound effects replacing ring scoring. It's a question of how exactly does one establish the ring as a sort of conscious character in a way. So there was originally music there for the struggle between Smeagol and Deagle. Arguably now Gollum and Deagle. I don't know if you can wait for the physical change or just the mental change, but it was a contrapuntal combination of the evil of the ring and the seduction of the ring, with very obvious story implications. But it's as Jim says, it's very much. It's a pity that it's not here because it does sort of show you the direction that this score will be taking with all these themes that are weaving.
It does, and there's another piece that runs throughout this sequence with a little more development of Gollum's material and some really nasty, evil-sounding variations of the history of the ring as well.
Yes.
I think that's the only time where we hear the history of the ring on Reator.
I think you're right. Yeah, that's right. Again, bringing the various musical elements of the ring music together and letting them overlap and inform one another. And of course, Gollum doing some of the lines that are part of his song. So that text back there with the boys' chorus, that was again the Seduction of the Ring, the same Tolkien text that was used way back in the Fellowship of the Ring for Keep It Secret, Keep It Safe, the moment where they leave the Shire. Question about yesterday, who wrote the fishing song? That's Gollum's fishing song. I believe that was a Fran Walsh creation.
Oh.
I believe Fran Walsh directed that prologue sequence as well.
For Return of the King?
Yeah, the
that's correct.
Smeagol-Deagle flashback.
Yeah. Great way to open the story, I think. This is where Gollum's character becomes so important, and also then cutting to Frodo here to show the potential path for him.
Yeah. This is one of those scenes that moved around a lot.
Yeah.
This was originally a little bit later.
Yeah. as far as the prologue goes, it lacks all the Sturm and Drang that you get in Fellowship's prologue, and you get a lot more Sturm and Drang in the Two Towers prologue. So this one was a surprise because it was more solemn, it was more meditative in a sense, and it was way more disturbing.
It is. It's also very much out of chronology. So the original opening to this film, well, I don't know if it was the original, but one of the early openings to this film was the forging of the sword. Originally, there was a version of this that began in Rivendell, where you saw the sword being reforged, and as they sort of finished hammering it and walking away with it, that's where you get the title card for the Return of the King.
Wow.
Yeah. I'm not sure exactly where in the chronology of the various openings of this film that existed, but it was one of the options, and it was created.
I think at one point it was supposed to be Aragorn having a vision of the paths of the dead in Edoras as well.
Yeah, a lot of different stuff.
Yeah. We did have a question the other night about a specific theme, which did not appear in the Two Towers, that will pop up again very shortly, which was one of the Ring Quest themes, the journey there. We haven't heard it for about a film and a half now.
Yeah, the journey themes are more, they're sort of bookend things. They show the early parts of the journey and the end parts of the journey. And I think they work better that way because they do carry a certain amount of weariness that maybe in the middle of the quest might have not really lent itself particularly well to the pacing of things. But at the beginning of the end, the sort of trepidation at the beginning and the sort of world weariness and physical weariness at the end of the quest. And here we go.
Yep. This reflects them leaving the cornfield in Fellowship, this bit.
The journey there, we call this one, yeah.
Yes.
There is another
question
one
about. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jim.
No, I was just going to touch on the other journey. Ring Quest theme, Dangerous Passes, which was supposed to appear a couple of times in the Return of the King, but that did not make it into the final mix.
No. A question during the little tremors that they experienced there, that they felt that sounded similar to the Ent theme. I think it's just Howard Shore fingerprints, as the great German minds or Austrian minds once said, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. I've always loved that setting of the Gondor theme. Again, it's one of these title card things. It's not really a part of the story. They're not in Gondor. They're not referencing Gondor. But the harmonization there is particularly nice. It sort of has a Mixolydian inflection to it, which would be sort of a major mode with a flat seventh degree.
Wow, in that moment, they're just reflecting upon the title itself being a reference to who will be King Elisar by the time.
Yeah, exactly. And they do that with each one. Fellowship of the Ring, you hear a bit of the Fellowship theme when the title card comes up. Two Towers, you hear a bit of the Rohan theme. I always refer to them as the curtain openers. They're not necessarily part of the story, but they are certainly a part of the texture, part of the storytelling. Very intriguing tone here to the music, where it's sort of a regal entrance for the Fellowship characters, sort of humorous, sort of mock, pompous. People always ask me favorite themes and favorite characters. I can tell you the line that I quote the most, and I have no reason, is salted pork. And I don't even eat pork, so I just like to say that.
Salted pork.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun to say.
It's really my most favorite Merry and Pippin bit. It's my favorite bit. I love it so much. This is the most intriguing conversation for people who mark the differences between the regular and the extended editions, because so much was built around the narrative of Saruman. So much was built around him, because Sauron himself was not really on the main stage as the main villain as much as Christopher Lee. And to see the theatrical version of Return of the King, and this entire 13-minute sequence was cut. It was just devastating. And it had larger ramifications as well. When the SAG Awards were offered by the Screen Actors Guild, and the Ensemble Award was won as the main prize, everybody was named, including Sean Bean, and everybody in the cast got to share in that award, but not Christopher Lee, not him, because he was not in the film.
Well, I'm glad we have him back now.
So am I.
That's unusual treatments of the Isengard material here.
Yeah.
There's a lot of aleatoric stuff in here again as well.
The aleatoric writing in this score in general seems to be at its highest point. There's a lot of that seething, bubbling texture going on in these scores. This is an interesting moment for the Isengard theme because it does sort of wrap up its application to Saruman, but the theme itself sort of carries over to the Mordor orcs and the remnants of the Isengard Uruk-hai and all that. So it doesn't stop this theme, but you do need to feel like you've reached a conclusion with this character.
It's still a sort of fairly muscular presentation here as well, sort of suggesting that Saruman still has some power, even though Isengard has been flooded here. Also sets up the Palantir somewhat better than the theatrical cut, where it just kind of appears.
True.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I think I'm sure Return of the King, they had a lot of issues with how many screenings can we get a day, regardless of the extended version. But there's so much in here that's quite crucial, and that's true musically as well. Connections and conclusions and through lines. I think it's very important.
It is kind of remarkable that Peter Jackson managed to push past his 3-hour limit because he was under contract to deliver 3 hours. And that's why the Fellowship of the Ring is 2 hours, 59 minutes, and 59 seconds running time. So the fact that Return of the King came out theatrically with 20 minutes more squeaked on was something of a minor miracle, really.
Was there ever a deleted scene establishing that the Uruk-hai went to Mordor? Not that I ever saw. But again, I only really saw deleted scenes if they had made it to a fairly late cut where they would have been scored. Good old worm tongue. This we all called the foot of Orthanc.
As in the spiky wheels at the foot of Orthanc.
True. Although I think we're also referring to the fact that all of our heroic Fellowship characters are down there, using the magical acoustics of Orthanc.
When I first saw Return of the King for the first time at the New Zealand world premiere in Wellington, I thought, well, if there's no Saruman and Wormtongue in the beginning, maybe they're going to sneak in a little scouring of the Shire at the end. I was mistaken when I thought
that. Yeah, the most of that you see is Galadriel's mirror, isn't it?
Yes.
A lot of stacked pan-diatonic clusters and things like that in this bit. A lot of portentous music. It's interesting that once you get to a location, if you're there for a bit, thematically, the score, it doesn't feel the need to quote the theme so much because they're not really lending any particular clarity to anything. We know where we are. We've been there for a while. If we just kept thudding out the Isengard theme or something, it'd be a bit redundant. So it gives Howard a chance to sort of play with those textures rather than
it's sort of, it's kind of one of the unique attributes of these scores. If you hear a piece of music, you can identify which environment the music was written for.
Yeah, very true. Somebody should do a study someday to see, in the context of all these scenes, where are themes most likely to be quoted. My guess is you'd find that it's more than anything at the introduction of characters and places. If you have a long, say if you have a 5-minute scene in Gondor, you'll probably hear the Gondor theme at the beginning of that scene, but not too much during it. I'm not certain of that, but I think that may be part of Howard's technique on these things.
And we're right back in the theatrical cut right away.
Back in the water. Rose says that the music of the Lord of the Rings films, the book, is a treasured addition to her library. That's incredibly kind. Thank you, Rose.
Back to
Now, see, here we are establishing this location at the beginning of the view of this location, an interesting truncated version of the Hardinger theme, the Hardinger playing the Rohan theme. Some of those extended pitches are shortened at the end.
It's interesting. I've never really spotted that before. We do have a couple of other themes that are presented in similarly truncated ways.
We do. Silver Trumpets will get a very interesting and very similar treatment coming up soon here. Now we have another actor that was sadly not used in the theatrical versions of these films coming up in a little bit.
We do.
Yes.
That's him coming up.
Very shortly.
That'd be great.
And there's some more fun dwarvish music coming up as well.
There he is back there next to the barrels. You'll see him again shortly.
There he is.
There's Howard. Howard with his tankard of ale. Howard only ever had kind things to say about these productions, except for his own performance. He was not fond of his own performance at all.
Oh, he's having a good old time. He looks quite happy.
That's what I told him, but he's a perfectionist. No, Howard Shore did not write himself a theme. In fact, perhaps a grand moment of irony for how much music there is in these films. There's no music playing when Howard appears. It's completely unscored.
There is a new dwarvish theme in this composition, though, which is I don't think it's anywhere else in the scores.
No, that's correct. It's unique to this.
There's really something so lovely to see the people of Rohan happy for only one bloody minute in time, because we've seen them go through so much grief,
Yeah, it won't last, but. Theoden's still a little glum during all this. As Jim says, there is. Sorry, go ahead.
So I was just going to say there, I think we get both of Eowyn's relationship themes back to back there.
Right. Yeah, it's a fascinating way to score Eowyn as a character, because she is hugely important as her own character, but her relationships are also quite important. So she does have her own theme, but she has these relationship themes. And I think it's a nice way to make sure that she has her own identity. It isn't just that she has these relationships. There's a question on Twitter. Did the music of The Hobbit at all take any cue or inspiration from this dwarf theme? We have a theme that Jim was referring to here, and it's more just a little slight figure, but the Hobbits had what we referred to as the end cap figure, and we have something that's similar to that here, but in a dwarvish vein. So we called it the dwarf end cap. And it doesn't really inform anything in the Hobbit scores thematically in terms of its attitude and its humor. Yeah, probably. I think that's fair to say. But it's more it made sense to sort of reference dwarf behavior in terms that we were familiar with. So there's some echoes to Hobbit behavior, but done in a sort of a dwarf type of harmonization and orchestration. It's similar to how you have a sort of dwarf statement of the Fellowship theme early in the Two Towers. This is the Green Dragon, wonderful text by Fran Walsh and Philip O'Boy working together on this one. Dermot Crean, the fiddle player who played all the Hardinger and the fiddle for the Shire and all that, also performs the Green Dragon solo there.
I think that's the only
So
Plan 9 piece that's
diegetic music in addition to the diegetic.
Mm-hmm. I think that's performed live in the live to projection concerts as well.
He froze. Yes, it is, and I think you're correct. That's the only Plan 9 thing that does that.
This is another one of those scenes that moved around a little as well.
I'm getting an increasing number of Hobbit theme questions. Let's go ahead and save those for when we're talking about the Hobbit scores. I think we have quite enough to digest with the Return of the King right now.
There is there's something to be said for how clever they decided to be in playing with Smeagol Gollum schizophrenia. The camera tricks, the edits, and the use of the reflection in the pool. It's just they never cease to amaze me how realistic and how this was portrayed. It's great.
Yeah, these back and forth things where they play with reflections or different angles, it's fantastic. And I think it's even more interesting to notice that there's a scene in An Unexpected Journey where they forego all of that and just do the change of the pupils. So
yeah, I
it's
noticed
a full
yeah.
Front shot of Gollum's face, and all you have to do is watch his eyes change. You don't actually cut to anything else.
Indeed.
There's a lot of very subtle animation work on his face as well, and you can tell just by the expression whether he's Smeagol or Gollum. Brilliant stuff.
Yeah. We're going to go very appropriately into a composition here that is Gollum's Villainy, which will contain a bit of both of his themes, the Pity of Gollum and the Menace of Gollum. The Pity of Gollum theme, or Gollum's sort of sad theme, the first theme that you heard for him in Fellowship of the Ring, really starts to dissipate in this score. It's much more of the Menace theme. But I've foreshadowed this a few times in the last couple of days, but if you will watch for the harmonies of Gollum's Pity theme, they're going to do something very, very, very structurally important as the story moves on.
Yeah, we have already heard something that does give a bit of an example of that. Way back in
Fellowship.
Way back in Rivendell. So when you're done watching this, go back and have another listen to that.
It gives you a sense of how far in advance some of these things are set up musically, which is so unique in film music. Film music historically does not have a long memory. You don't get a lot of quotes of things from, a film 2 years prior, or certainly you don't get hints of things 2 years in advance of a final statement. So that the type of forethought and dramatic planning in this music is incredibly unique and incredibly effective.
You're a very bad lad, Peregrine Took. Very bad.
Some more of the Éowyn and Aragorn theme coming up here for the composition we called Éowyn's Dream.
If I remember correctly, this Faramir's dream in the book. I think the dialogue is all from Faramir.
Clifford would remember that better than I would, but it sounds very possible.
I'm sorry, the question?
The line about the dream and seeing a great wave, was that Faramir in the book?
Yes, it is, actually. Yes. If I'm not mistaken, I'm going to grab my copy of the book right now. I think it's from the chapter, The Houses of Healing, which may be a foreshadowing of how Éowyn meets her fate with Faramir. I mean, her romantic fate.
Lovely comment on Twitter. The score is the single thing in Jackson's films that is entirely beyond reproach. My favorite is Two Towers, but they're all great. That's very, very kind from Woko Haram. Thank you, Woko Haram.
There is a little piece of music that underscores this scene, which has never made it to any version of the film, but does pop up in the live to projection performances.
Yes, yes. This scene looks a lot better in the 4K as well, doesn't it? So we're going to get into a composition here that is for the Palantir. And it's going to bring a lot of the Mordor themes together. Sometimes, for example, the history of the ring and the evil of the ring combined as a sort of hybrid theme here. In other cases, you will hear, for example, the evil of the ring and the descending third motif that sort of stomp on top of one another, even though they're in somewhat different modes. So you're getting these sort of polytonal things happening. And it's showing you some of the techniques that Howard will use as he weaves all these themes together in the third score. Sometimes they combine into new themes. Sometimes they lay atop one another in counterpoint. Sometimes they affect one another. It's a number of different approaches, which gives you a lot of variety, musically speaking.
And from a technical recording perspective, we talked about how the orchestra was always together and everyone was always recorded together. This is one of the few examples where the orchestra was actually striped with sections recorded individually to give more control over the final mix.
Likely because they were against a lot of sound effects here. Question: Are there compositions that are played exclusively in the live performances compared to these films, the home video versions? Yes, the music would still be on the albums, but yeah, you do get a little bit more music in the live performances than you would in home video or theatrical re-release or something like that.
You do, and The Return of the King has some unique additional chorus in a couple of places that, as I understand it, was never recorded at the original sessions.
Right, yeah. We're going to get a little bit of music here shortly that will give you just a taste of what the music for the Army of the Dead will be. Getting questions already about the writing for the fourth age, but that will be tomorrow. We're in the third age right now.
Indeed.
No spoilers. We might not make it to the fourth age. We don't know what's going to happen here.
I think we do get a couple of fourth age themes in this half of the film. I'm going to check.
You're not helping me, Jim.
According to my reference tome here, which may look familiar, we did actually get a fourth age theme way back in Fellowship.
Yeah, there are little hints of it, and what I'm saving to talk about tomorrow is there is a different type of
There is.
harmonization
I am
music, but it's easier to talk about as we get closer to that. No, it's not. I suppose we spend all these stories on the precipice of the fourth age. So
yeah. I think the fourth age material I'm referring to is more the sort of what the fourth age could be if Sauron wins.
True. Yeah, a potential fourth age, but yeah. It's one of these things where the fourth age will rely heavily upon the sort of harmonic language of the music of mankind. And it becomes a chicken or the egg type of question. Is the music of the fourth age harmonized in that way because mankind is ultimately victorious, or is mankind sort of adopting in advance the harmonies of the fourth age? I tend to think of it as sort of an unanswerable question, to be completely honest. But it's probably easier to talk about that as we get closer to the end of the story tomorrow. Because there's a lot of new fourth age material at the end of this. Everyone always talks about the ending keeps going on Return of the King. Well, there's a lot of information in there that is actually quite important to the musical storytelling. So I'm glad that it goes on for as long as it does for the most part. And it could have been a lot longer. There was a wedding that was going to be in there at one point too. So.
Indeed.
So we did get our first little hint of material for the Paths of the Dead back there.
Correct. Yes. Just a sort of miniature quote, but it is in there. And coming to our beginning here, the flight from Edoras. So we're hearing bits of Fellowship colors, bits of Hobbit colors, the wonderful clarinet in there. But ultimately, we're going to end up with a nice broad 3/4 statement of the White Rider theme.
This is one of those compositions where there are a few different versions depending on different lengths of the film.
Yes.
The theatrical cut had a short version of this. The original album was slightly longer, and the extended version is even longer.
You do start to get an understanding of why the recording sessions went on so long, because they were hitting a moving target a lot of the time.
I haven't checked, but I do believe The Return of the King may have set a record for the highest number of recording sessions for a single film.
If such records exist, I would imagine this was the film that broke them.
Yeah.
The film broke a lot of records.
The theatrical cut, there were 88 recording sessions for the theatrical cut, including all the choir sessions. If you add in the extended cut, it goes up to, I think, 110. So just to give an example, when John Williams was recording sort of the 2-hour Star Wars prequel scores, they were typically done in 15, 16 3-hour sessions, maybe. So,
wow.
Very different.
A lot of studio time.
Yeah. Enormous amounts. expensive studio time as well. This is another scene that was in a number of different places during production.
A number of different pieces of music.
Yes.
This is Renee Fleming.
This is Renee Fleming. It was not always Renee Fleming, but this is where, when it ended up in Return of the King, this ended up being a Renee Fleming piece. This is another bit that is showing progression, moving from more type of folk singing, voices of hard to, not to say that Enya has the voice of the people. Certainly she has a beautiful and very unique voice, but it is a sort of folk type of voice. And we've moved here to an operatic type of voice. So just showing, I don't know if you would call it a change in sophistication or a change in tone or a change in the weight of the drama, but you can feel the world changing, which is a huge part of this story as well. And it's certainly an important part of the elves' story, because the world is changing for them and they're about to depart it.
Mm.
So there is a piece
Renee
of...
Fleming has a number of performances in this score.
She does. There was a performance by a different artist under this sequence at one point, which we will hear somewhere else a little bit later.
We will.
Tomorrow,
we
I
will.
think.
Yes, I think that's right. And that was another one we didn't get until we got the extended versions of everything. So we have the Even Star theme in here. We'll have a bit of the Rivendell theme in here. And the Minas Tirith theme is coming up. And this is a very unique setting of it. It's a little bit further down the line. That's what there's questions about the vocal performance here, and that's something we will get to tomorrow night. But yes, as Jim said, there was supposed to be a different performer here.
Oh.
And don't worry, that performer was not removed from everything. They will appear later. Did Figwit have a theme? No. What was his official name finally? Lindier or something?
Lindier.
Lindier, yeah. But
hardcore old school fans call him Frodo is great. Who is that?
That's right. So this was a lot of this material here. This was the original opening to The Return of the King. All this reforging of the sword.
Really?
Yeah. Well, again, I can't say that it was original, but it was an earlier version.
I'm not sure if music was written for it at that point, but
no, I don't think it was.
I don't think it was ever recorded.
No, every version I ever saw of that edit had a temporary score, not Howard Shore music. So I don't think he ever wrote to that.
There's some interesting stuff in Arwen's book there, which we don't quite see.
I think I may have mentioned yesterday, or maybe during Fellowship, that originally during the fall of the tower, at the end of Return of the King, you would cut back to this as well. Arwen would reawaken.
We could talk a little bit more about that composition tomorrow, but if anyone wants to check it out now, it's on the rarities.
Yes, yeah. One of the things I'm most proud that we have on the rarities, in fact. And the Rivendell arpeggios.
And another theme which we haven't heard.
Yeah, the title card, I think, came up over that shot right there, I think. But here's our Minas Tirith theme, or the Silver Trumpets theme. This is the same theme that played when Boromir was remembering his homeland in Lothlorien. Rhythmically sort of foreshortened there a bit. This was a lot of the music that I was present for the recording of in England.
Yeah,
and now he just passed to the realm of Gondor. We have the Gondor theme, And I remember there was a lot of work done to try to make this piece hit the top of its crescendo just as they arrive at the top of Minas Tirith. They had to change some meters to make everything line up right.
This also moved around a little bit as well. If anyone's listening to the complete recordings, this music appears twice. Once surrounded by the Arwen piece that we heard earlier, and again as part of the Osgiliath sequence. As the film was cut when it was originally scored, Gandalf and Pippin arrived as Faramir and co were fleeing from Osgiliath.
The question is the Snyder cut of, what was it called? Justice League?
Justice League.
A rare, a rare instance where there will be extra music. It's not just extra music, it's a whole other score. Danny Elfman's score for the theatrical release of that will not be used in the Snyder cut. It will be replaced by the original score by Junkie XL. Or is he, did he do that one under Junkie XL, or is he Tom Holkenberg for that? I'm not sure. I don't know if we're using, as they say in Avengers, are we using made up names? There was definitely no questions about what I thought about Trent Reznor's score for Soul, so I don't have to talk about that. That's good. I'm glad no one asked about that. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
I actually enjoyed
Trent, if you're watching,
Soul
sorry
very
about
much.
that. Soul's fantastic. I as a musician, I was thrilled that they actually depicted the instruments correctly. You always see people in movies holding these things wrong and looking like they're about to, you know, blow on the wrong end of something, but somehow if we animated them, they got every single keystroke correct. So yeah,
That's
the
awesome.
jazz part of it's brilliant. Absolutely.
I can't get over what a magnificent interior set this is.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Little callback to Boromir's death.
Mm-hmm. There'll be a few of those in this score, a couple.
It's because of these flashbacks that Sean Bean has a single title card credit at the end of the film, and Christopher Lee does not. Just absorb that for a moment.
Yes, that text there was also the death of Boromir, technically the death of Boromir Part 2. And Jim, there is a moment coming up where we can talk a little bit about a Fourth Age theme. So this movie takes place in the Third Age of Middle Earth. It's not this scene, it's coming up in a little bit here. But the Fourth Age, in addition to ushering a new era in Middle Earth, largely sweeps the stage of existing themes and reapplies thematic material. And one of those themes will be obviously applied to Gondor. It's what we've called Gondor Reborn. And you get a little hint of that coming up in a just about a scene from now. Jim, if you'll remind me, we have a question about the lighting of the beacons, which is a little ways off as well, but yeah.
Denethor has all this sort of fractured, fragmented material. It doesn't really have any specific thematic material other than little fragments of other stuff.
No, but there's some fantastic frenzied string writing for him as he gets angrier and angrier.
There's a nice little moment here that's not scored in the theatrical cut, but is in the extended version. Just as Gandalf turns to leave.
This figure here too, where he stands up, tremendous figure.
Yeah, so there's no music here in the theatrical cut. Gandalf just walks out in silence.
Glad they put that back in.
Some more treatments of silver trumpets here.
Yeah,
yes.
paying off something that we saw long ago. I think in Howard's mind there was a sort of poetic connection between that theme and the white tree. I don't think it was anything strictly literal, but I think it did sort of conjure that sonic imagery to him.
I love the way this cuts off the Gondor material before it goes into either the ascension or the descension phrase.
Yes. Yeah, we talked about that a bit yesterday. So to reiterate, the principal Gondor theme has two different endings, one that ascends, one that declines, and it sort of goes with the fortunes of Gondor.
I think we heard the ascension version.
But as Jim is pointing out, sometimes it's left. Yeah.
Yeah, we heard the ascension version earlier
as
Gandalf rode to the top of Minas Tirith.
Right. Certainly a rare positive development for Gondor at this point in the story.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you don't get that consequent phrase at all. It is just left as a question mark.
So we get another new scene coming up in a few seconds, which I think was one of the very first pieces of music written for the Return of the King. At least the first half of it.
The question is, coming from Twitter, you call it silver trumpets now, but in the book it's Minas Tirith. Yeah, we use those terms fairly interchangeably in discussion. But for a book, you have to decide upon one. All right, so this is the scene where we're going to get some more important Gondor material, including what we're referring to as a proposed Fourth Age theme, since we still don't know at this point in the story how precisely the Fourth Age will go.
This scene was in the theatrical cut, or was going to be in the theatrical cut at one point, and had music recorded for it, but was rescored for the extended version.
A little bit of fellowship there.
I just noticed that, a little leftover fellowship bit.
Yeah, exactly. Once a member of the fellowship, always a member of the fellowship, I suppose.
Well, this added scene with the crown of flowers over the king's statue head is just one of my favorite bits. Journey to the Crossroads in the book.
It's a fantastic scene and very important musically.
Yeah, the Sam and Frodo scenes were some of the first compositions written for the film.
There's just a little bit of the Gondor Reborn theme, the theme that is offering itself as a potential theme for the Fourth Age, but is immediately swallowed up by these dissonances.
Indeed. I will forever be listening to these notes differently now that I know these wonderful distinctions. It's great.
Yeah, I mean, musical analysis can be a very dangerous thing because it can, sort of undo the magic of music sometimes, where you're listening too much to the technicalities of everything. And I think that was part of the reason that we tried to create a book that felt like it was of the same dramatic intentions as the score and as of the filmmaking. So we, instead of just saying, dry technical jargon, theme A, theme B, we wanted something that at least evoked these same sort of storytelling elements, so that it actually made everything stronger to know what was happening, instead of feeling like, well, now I'm listening for the truncation of half notes to quarter notes and this mode is shifting. I didn't want that sort of a thing. I didn't want to make something that took you out of the story. I wanted it to be something that actually took you deeper into the mythology, while also, certainly you do have to get the technicalities of what's happening, but hopefully finding a way to make them enriching.
It's very easy to overanalyze and just over describe everything, having timestamps for the appearance of every theme, and it just becomes very ridiculous very quickly.
There is a whole school of thought for analysis that's more of the list making persuasion, and certainly a lot of people like that. It's just not really something that I feel, to my mind, strengthens music and storytelling. It's interesting to know. I'm just not a statistics type of listener, I suppose.
There was originally music throughout this sequence, which is all on the complete
Yes.
recordings.
A lot of thematic stuff too. Evil Times, some of the Small Stones music as a secondary, perhaps tertiary theme associated with the Hobbits. Some Weakness and Redemption, and a bit more of the Evil and History of the Ring hybrid that's beginning to appear more and more in the score now.
The live to projection restores a little bit of it, I think, where we see the first shot of the Witch King, who has a potential fourth age theme.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Well, a great introduction to Minas Morgul, which used to be Minas Ithil.
Yeah, I think I've heard this referred to more than once by the Wizard of Oz scene. It does have that same coming up upon Oz, although quite the opposite reaction.
There's a really big piece of music that's dialed out the final mix here as well. As Frodo is lured to the gates. It's a massive choral crescendo using the, I think it's the Black Speech ring verse again.
I think that may be Adunaic here. Yeah.
Is it Adunaic?
Yeah, I believe so. Sorry, I've got another question coming in. Belated question about Renee Fleming. In your book, you mentioned that she found the unadorned non-vibrato tone in Lord of the Rings vocal music helpful in preparing Baroque repertoire. I thought this was interesting because you referred to Howard's composition style as more reminiscent of the late Romantic period in German opera. Was this a conscious point of contrast for Howard, or something only musicologists would care about? That's a very good question. I think I'm speaking of the emotional tone and the structural tone or structural elements when I'm talking about the operatic comparisons. In terms of vocal performance, though, it is, especially in the music of the elves, which is a more ancient culture and is matched to what's a more ancient musical style. It is a more sort of Baroque style of vocal singing with very little to no vibrato. And Renee Fleming, I believe, was about to record an album of Handel music right after this, if I remember correctly. And found that singing the elvish music for Return of the King was quite helpful in getting into the headspace for that. Now we're getting a lot of Mordor things here, and some of the Witch King / Orcs of Mordor music. Another potential fourth age theme, as Jim mentioned.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Just going back to what we were talking about earlier, you are correct, Doug. It was Adunaic, and it was the revelation of the ring wraiths in the piece that wasn't used.
Ah, good.
And we're back in 5 again.
Yes, yeah. So we don't actually see the leftover orcs from Isengard joining the Mordor orcs, but musically we do get a little bit of a hint of it here, that they've realigned themselves. Question through Twitter: what's your opinion on the sentiment that leitmotivic score writing in general is exactly the sort of overly mathematical list-making mindset that you've just derided? I think Mr. Wagner might have some thoughts on that comment. Yeah, I think there's really nothing to that. Anything can be done mathematically and passionless. Goodness knows I've heard plenty of athematic scores that feel very mathematically created and applied. So I don't think there is any single approach to any of these things that is automatically passionless or heartfelt. I think it all depends on what is done with it. You know, it's like we just talk about with some of these more advanced harmonic languages that happen in the mid to late 20th century. Serial music is not a style, it's a technique. Your style is still your style. All these things are techniques, style and application. That's where the artist comes in. We know the same words as the poets, but they're the ones creating the poetry.
Exactly. Well said. A question appeared in the chat room about the blasting green pillar of light from Minas Morgul. And the way it's described in the books is different. And that was the question from the chat. In the book, you have to go back to the two towers to be properly in the narrative where Gollum and Sam and Frodo are outside Minas Morgul. And according to Tolkien, it says, and Minas Morgul answered. There was a flare of livid lightning, forks of blue flame, not green, forks of blue flame springing up from the tower and from the encircling hills into the sullen clouds. So no, it was not green. That was a Peter Jackson choice.
Return of the King was certainly the green film. We've talked about what colors we associate with these things. So I guess Return of the King is the green one. By the way, Jim was mentioning earlier the Ring Quest themes, and we did have originally a version of the Dangerous Passes theme in that last scene, but that did not survive the film edit, but it is on the complete recordings.
It is. And all of this extended Osgiliath material was recorded when they were recording the music for the theatrical cut. Some of it's actually on the original album.
Yeah, I was. These are all scenes that I was there for. I think this was my first day with the orchestra, to be honest with you.
Yeah. So as we were discussing earlier, the sequence was intercut with Gandalf arriving at Minas Tirith. So this whole section moved around a little bit. There's also a couple of different takes on the lighting of the beacons that we'll talk about in a few minutes.
Yeah, and as I said, we do have some good questions pertaining to that as well.
This is the scene with
in
Roy
fact, yes, I
Scolding.
believe. Is he in this?
Yeah, not in the
section
two
with
towers.
Roy?
He's in this bit, I
Oh,
believe.
great.
He is. He
Okay.
is. I did spot him when I was watching the 4K the other day, but.
People who read the book, by the way, will notice that we cover the lighting of the beacons before we cover the whole Osgiliath sequence, and that is because that is the order the music was in when the score was locked. Those scenes were eventually reversed, but we decided to go with the fidelity of the original compositions.
There's a few instances where they did go back and re-record sort of some transitions between pieces. But that's not what the complete recordings in the book represents.
So if you're following along at home with the book, I'm not sure that anybody is, but if you, that would be, we're on page 294 right now, but we'll go backwards in a little bit.
I believe this is disc 2, track 1, if anyone is on the complete recordings.
There are many ways to follow along at home, I suppose. Yeah. Some very forceful statements of Gondor material in here. Strangely, I saw these scenes before I saw the Two Towers extended scenes. So that quote of that theme there that I heard at the recording sessions was my aha moment that the French horn melody from the Council of Elrond was in fact the Gondor theme, because it hadn't really been heard in anything up until that point. Because I saw this the September before they actually released the extended version of Two Towers. A little bit out of order for me.
Our live chat includes Matt Hughes, who wants to tell you, Doug, your book is literally the perfect companion to open while watching the films every time.
Oh, thanks, Matt. That's great. I just got a note from Emily on Twitter that also says she's been reading along with the book for all of these watch alongs. So that's super cool. Thanks, guys. I have been too.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, it's down here. I'm trying to remember what I wrote. It's shocking to me how long ago these things were done.
This Gondorian soldier who's sitting here, not him, but the other guy, is that Ethan Van Der Inn?
Christian Rivers there, yeah.
It's Christian Rivers.
Now a director in his own right, yeah.
Yeah, director of Mortal Engines.
That's right.
That's right, Christian Rivers. And yes, this is the biggest wonderful piece of music in Hollywood history, period. It doesn't get any better than this, ladies and gentlemen.
It does not get any better than this. This is absolutely iconic. It is, up there with the opening to Star Wars and Lawrence of Arabia and things like that. Just absolutely indestructible moments of music, movie music. It
must have been exhausting for the players to play.
This was actually done, and so there are multiple versions of this, which you can talk about in just a moment. But this was done as their very first take. I think this might have been the first piece they played for Return of the King. I forget. I know it was one of the very early things. Yeah.
It was. I think they did this and the introduction to all the Minas Morgul material on the first day.
Yeah, absolutely incredible. We did, as I say, Jim, let's come to the multiple versions in just a moment, but we did have a question about the string writing in this one. A question about the lighting of the beacons coming up. The arpeggiated string accompaniment reminds me of the orchestration when the Ents are destroying Isengard in Theoden Rides Forth. Any connection or just another Howard Shore fingerprint? I think it is probably more likely a Howard Shore fingerprint, although I should always be very clear when I'm talking about Howard Shore fingerprints, I should really call them Howard Shore Middle Earth fingerprints, because he writes in a very different manner in other scores. He's not even always writing for orchestra. He writes for a lot of different ensembles. But I think it was just part of his sound for the Lord of the Rings. And Jim, before we get too far past it, do you want to talk about the alternate versions of that beacon scene?
Yeah, so if anyone is listening to the original single disc album, you'll hear a slightly different version of that that focuses more on major harmonies than minor. Sounds somewhat more triumphant than the version that appears in the film.
You can sync that up; it still fits. Yeah.
You can sync. You can just about sync it up. There's one little bit where it goes out because they're moving that shot of Denethor around a little bit. But,
True.
It mostly syncs up. The strings are a little more frantic in the film version as well.
Yeah, and it shows you how careful they were about the tone of these things. It sounded a little too celebratory, and they still wanted to feel like, you know, it was a call to action. It was a call that would be answered, but it was still dealing with necessity and issues.
Yeah, and
which issue? Excuse me. Which version? It says, Jim. Let me give this one quickly. Which version of the beacons is heard in the live concerts?
In the live to projection concerts, it's the minor version. If you're listening to the Lord of the Rings symphony, it's the major version.
That's correct. Yes, so you can hear both of them live depending on what you go to.
Indeed. And just going back to Cliff's question about tiring out the musicians, they did about 10 takes of the beacons back to back. So these musicians had clearly had a lot of coffee on that day.
We're talking broken fingers, the poor violinists. I don't understand the cramps. How do you breathe? How do you breathe?
Jim, you know far better than I that during the break, those musicians were not going for the coffee.
I mean, it's insane to me. You guys are the professionals. Tell me what happens when the orchestra is placed under so much physical strain because, to quote Amadeus, there's just too many notes.
You're talking about the first day of the sessions and everyone is exceptionally energized.
Some of these things too, this is again where Howard knows how to write for specific instruments. So the busy stuff in that is a lot of string playing. The string playing is not as physically taxing as some other things. The nature theme here, we should talk about this in just a moment. Okay. Brass players, they do have bump players, someone to step in and fill in if they start to get very tired and things like that. So he knows how to divide up those responsibilities so that an orchestra doesn't absolutely collapse. The nature theme here, as they are leaving, this was a point of contention with some people when this came out. What does this have to do with nature? The nature theme sort of slides over and becomes a theme for the good in Middle Earth. As it is still related to Middle Earth in that manner, we like the idea of keeping the title the nature theme. It doesn't reassign itself to any cultures. It's almost like the cultures are becoming worthy of that existing theme. It's sort of a non-literal way of looking at it, but there are non-literal moments in these scores, of course. So no one, all these people that are trying to be wise guys and say, well, they have horses. The horses are nature. Or there's the sun is nature. It's not quite that literal. But I do like the idea of having a theme that has planted its purpose, and instead of the theme having to be reassigned to somebody else, other characters have to sort of change their ways to be worthy of that existing theme.
Back in Osgiliath, this is a new choral text. This is the retreat from Osgiliath.
Yes.
Black wings against a pale morning. There is no more light, not in this sun.
Comment, perhaps the fact that the Rohirrim sided with the Ents grants them the grace of nature. Yes.
I
don't know that the Ents needed that much help from the Rohirrim. They seem to have things under control.
The three peoples of Middle Earth, any one of them being the harbingers of nature's intention.
Yeah, I mean, you could almost, and I stress the word almost, you could almost retitle that theme as a sort of the will of Middle Earth theme. what is nature? If you're going to give nature a sort of a personification, what is it other than Middle Earth in these stories? But again, you get overly concerned with naming conventions, you start to lose the power of the storytelling. That sounds like a cop-out, but I certainly don't intend it as such. This may be more applicable to American audiences. Jim, you'll have to let me know if I'm wrong, but I really think that Orc sounds like Dr. Claw from Inspector Gadget. Did that play in the UK? Okay.
The inimitable Frank Welker. Yes.
That's right, Frank Welker. Yeah. Absolutely.
Voices anything and everything.
Yeah. Did you ever see the film The Informant, Jim?
No.
Frank Welker shows up as Matt Damon's father in that film, which was the most confusing moment of realization for me. And he's good.
Isn't he in the computer wore tennis shoes?
I know that one, but I've never seen it. I think that's on Disney Plus. I could catch that tonight, right? Sit and enjoy a massive blizzard outside and watch.
Who's the soloist right here?
This is Ben Del Maestro again, who I think does.
This is Ben Del Maestro. Yes,
I think he does all of the boy soprano solos in this score.
Doesn't he do the soprano solo when Gandalf dies in Fellowship?
No, that's wonderful New Zealand soprano.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. That was all part of those New Zealand sessions. Most of that Moria music is not British musicians.
So
the choral sessions, I should point out, were done separate. We mentioned this. They were done separate from the orchestral sessions, but they were mostly done at Abbey Road, which is not where most of the orchestral sessions were done. A few were done there, but not that many. But the choral sessions were mostly overseen by the choir masters. Howard would check in via very early webcam connections from his hotel where he was continuing to write. But
Terry Edwards.
Terry Edwards for the adult chorus. I forget the choir master for the boys. I know we have that down someplace. I forget his name. He was a very strict director, wonderful musician, a wonderful director. I mean, very, very kind with the boys, and boys being boys will lose their focus and get a little wiggly after a while, and you would have to before a take here or there offer a very stern, now straighten up boys, straighten up, let's go. And you could tell which were the British people in the booths and which were the American people in the booths. The American people would continue slouching, having no great concern for the son of a schoolmaster. All the British people in the booth would suddenly stiffen up and be ready to go. I think they had that beaten into them over the years.
The other observation about Terry Edwards is that he both looks and sounds like Christopher Lee.
And he was an Olympic basketball player. He's a fascinating individual. He actually conducted a few performances, of the Lord of the Rings symphony, which is very unusual for someone that's more known as a choral director.
So once again, the music for this sequence was recorded with the rest of the music for the theatrical cut. This music originally then went into Pippin climbing the tower and lighting the beacons.
Correct. Jim mentioned yesterday that Faramir does not have a theme, but does have at least some specific instrumental colors associated with him. And we'll get to some of those shortly as well. Another wonderful crescendo for Denethor springing out of the chair there.
A madman. He's hallucinating all the time.
Yeah. Cliff, where did they get the shot of Sean Bean? That obviously was not done just for this film, but was it left over from Fellowship?
I've always wondered where they got that from.
Okay.
I know they did reshoots for the whole Sons of the Steward sequence in the extended Two Towers. So I wonder if that came from that.
Could be. It would probably explain why you have a sort of happy version of Boromir.
Mm.
This, from my personal history, this was the first scene that I saw them record live. Here as Gollum is sort of reaching and struggling, and you hear this wonderful statement of the Ring theme. So I literally walked into the room with the orchestra practicing the Ring theme.
Wow.
And I thought, well, I know where I am now. Actually, I probably didn't think anything nearly as calm as I was beside myself with angst, but I was thrilled to be there.
The music tells us so much about these characters and where they've been. Was it harder the third time around, do you think? Did Howard ever say that this one was the most burdensome, the most work to bring it all together? Did he ever indicate that for Return of the King?
I think Return of the King may have been the most work, not in terms of concept, but in terms of just the amount of music.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this film probably used as much music as, you know, 4 ordinary non-action spectacular films. There's probably a good 4 Cronenberg scores in in The Return of the King.
Wow.
It's just an enormous amount of music. I think Howard did key upon that idea early that this would be the score that combined things. So he did have a guiding principle behind everything, which really helped him. As a great recollection here, an anecdote from Emily. At the live to projection concerts at Ravinia in 2017, the boy soprano was really struggling with the high notes. It felt like the audience was collectively rooting for him, and he got extra loud applause when he took his bows. Yeah, there's some challenging writing for boy soprano in this. Not to mention that, you know, you're dealing with young musicians. It takes a lot of focus for these wonderful young musicians to do these things. But the Osgiliath portions, there's some very high writing in there. There's an incredibly difficult key change at the end of Fellowship of the Ring when In Dreams comes in. That's so hard to find your pitch in that section. So yeah, any of these things, it's wonderful how much warmth the audience provides for these performers. These are athletic feats. Never let it be said that, you know, playing an instrument or performing music vocally is a slothful pursuit. It takes an incredible amount of physicality.
For the audience who is joining us just now, we are 1 hour and 20 minutes into The Return of the King, Part 1, and we're at the scene with Peregrine Took now working with Denethor as a guard of the Citadel and having a conversation with Faramir about exactly whose little boy armor that was in the past. It was Faramir's armor. And Pippin is getting way, way, way more screen time than Merry here. He really is.
Pippin gets some features here, yeah.
This was all recorded for the theatrical cut too.
Yes.
There's a little piece where Pippin sort of recites his vows to Denethor that's not used in the final film.
Mm-hmm.
And then we go into some of the unique instrumental stuff for Faramir that we'll talk about when we get there.
Question here from Twitter is, how did the Billy Boyd composition or the song come to be? Whose idea was it? And how did it work with Shore's score? This is another one where there was kind of a cool coincidence. So it was the filmmaker's idea. It was all done on set. So that's prior to any of the scoring. But it did, again, work out that he sort of begins with intervals very close to the Gondor theme. So it feels very connected. That nice open fifth at the beginning of his song. I'm trying to remember, maybe Clifford, Jimmy might remember, but I think the song was part of initial photography. I don't think it was done in any of the pickups for extended edition material. I think the song was always part of this.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yes.
I think the filmmakers just knew that Billy had a beautiful voice and decided to give him a moment to feature it.
Mm-hmm.
They were always looking for ways to get Tolkien's text and languages back into these films. That's really where the idea for the choral texts came from. It's a way to get these things in. You can't stop and have great recitations of poetry in the middle of a giant, ostensibly action film or a mythological film. There are still certain commercial considerations, and as Cliff pointed out, these things got very long without people stopping to recite poetry and sing songs to one another.
Yeah, and there's a
So
huge
way to
amount
get
of
back in.
a huge amount of exposition in these films already.
It is just
but
as remarkable.
getting the text back into the choral pieces at least gives you that nice subtext for those who know.
Yeah. Think about how much Khuzdul is spoken in these films and how much Khuzdul is sung in these films. Far more is performed by the choruses.
I was going to remark how surprising it is that any of these songs that are sung a cappella appear anywhere at all. From the moment of An Unexpected Journey, with all the dwarves singing, right here to Return of the King, where Aragorn sings at his coronation, and Pippin has this profoundly moving moment. It surprised all of us as general fans that any of this stuff managed to get into the films at all. It was great.
So can you imagine pitching that to a studio head, and then they break into song?
Sorry, what's the question? You mean the video chapter or the book? I don't know, because the 4K does not have chapters unless I pause it. And so I know that the next chapter coming up in the next scene is probably the sacrifice of Faramir. Because that's the scene where I actually appear as a soldier of Gondor.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
But I could pull out my old Blu-rays and see what the chapter title is for where we are right now.
The composition is the Stairs of Cirith Ungol. I don't know if that is the same as the 4K title or not.
I think this is chapter 27, which is the parting of Sam and Frodo.
Yep, it is. It's the parting of Sam and Frodo. Correct, you got it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So Google comes to the rescue.
As it often does. There's some writing in this section that presages what Howard Shore would eventually do in the Hobbit films, where the History of the Ring theme is suggested by the slightest gestures possible, really just 2 notes. So you'll hear a rising half-step figure and hear B to C again, which eventually later in the scene sort of rolls out, pardon me, into the full History of the Ring theme. But you can always hear him experimenting with how little can I state and make my intentions clear. And it turns out you can state very little when you become very familiar with that motif. Well, you can just hint at it and you know immediately what it is. More aleatoric writing in here.
Yes.
scoring for all the fights between Sam and Gollum in this film is much more violent than it is elsewhere.
Yeah. You have to build that conflict between the two of them.
Yeah.
And the choice to have Frodo send Sam off on his own has to feel earned. You have to feel that Sam is perhaps losing his composure as well. As he's sharing the load here, just a reminder that if people are trying to ask us questions, we have a hashtag set up on Twitter, hashtag LOTR score questions, or you can DM either me at Doug Adams Music or Jim at Jim J. Ware. And I think Justin, our wonderful producer, is monitoring the YouTube chat. So if anything comes up in there, he'll send that over to us. Oh, and Cliff is as well. Perfect. Thank you. So we're quite reachable if you have questions. This is like easy. That's right. Do you think they'll just use this for the next round of 4K releases? Cut out the part where I complain about Soul.
Terrible. This is
sorry.
This is a part where I never agreed with the screenwriters here that Frodo would ever make this decision to send Sam away. And I understand completely why we're building up to this moment where Sam would reappear later on when he's most needed. But anyways, I never quite bought into it that Frodo would send Sam away into the wilderness by himself. I just never bought it. Yes, well, we'll see about that. I can hear the voice of our producer in the background, but whatever. So, yes, I was here on the physical set this day when they were filming this scene.
Incredible.
And it was it was the set that used to be Helm's Deep, and they tore everything down and rebuilt it to be the exteriors of Minas Tirith. And there was a very fresh coat of paint on the gates, the great gates of Minas Tirith. I was there watching the person with their brush speckle and fleck little distressing parts of paint all over the gate. It was wonderful to be there that day.
Oh, cool, yeah. And we're hearing a pan flute here, which is the instrument that we've sort of been hinting at, that you have a sort of instrumental association that goes with Faramir. Howard was looking back in history to ancient instruments, kind of thinking of Minas Tirith as the ancient Rome of Middle Earth in a way, and settled upon the sounds of the pan flute.
All the
which is a sort of...
So I was going to say the pan flute soloist is Ulrich Herkenhoff.
Correct, yes.
There's also a Sindarin choral text under here, which is specifically about Faramir, which is the last son.
I think we had to go back to Ulrich to get a picture of the pan flute for the book, or at least for the liner notes. So I think you do actually see the literal pan flute that was used in these performances. This is a great example of the declining phrase that follows the opening statement of the Gondor theme. Things are pretty grim here, pretty bad. We really think that we're seeing Faramir going off to his death, and in fact, Faramir believes that as well. Another anecdote from Emily on Twitter, if you'll allow another anecdote. Billy Boyd and his band Bee Cake played a gig in Chicago suburbs in 2017, and Billy sang an a cappella version of The Edge of Night. The crowd responded like it was a religious experience. Everyone held their breath in silence for several seconds after the song ended before applauding wildly. Yeah. Billy is people always ask if you have anything to do with these films. Well, do you know the actors? And I've met most of the actors through various events or whatever, but Billy is one of the few that I actually got to spend some time with and have dinner with him at time. And he's every bit as charming as an actual human being as he is as a hobbit, although far less klutzy and destructive. But a wonderful gift as both an actor and as a musician, as you can hear.
He is such a wonderful human being. He really is.
Yeah, it's delightful.
I had been on mute this whole time when I was talking. I didn't realize it, but there was
Oh,
that
so
long
sorry.
shot of the soldiers standing on the wall looking out as the horses rode away. And that was me standing there next to the actor who played Irolas. He had a cape
That's
on,
right.
and I'm the guy standing next to him on the wall. And
Does that break any of the magic for you, seeing yourself in this?
not at all. I remember
Good.
distinctly that the direction we were given was to look very sad and concerned for Faramir and his men because they weren't coming back. So the direction we were given as extras was to look very sad for Faramir, watching them leave the city.
Was Pete directing that day?
Yes, he was. Yes.
Wonderful, wonderful.
That's my single favorite shot in the film. That tableau with Gandalf sitting quietly. It's very chiaroscuro. You can tell that Gandalf is thinking about Frodo, that his mind is completely elsewhere. That is my single favorite shot of the film right there.
There's a tiny little touch of Hardanger in there as well. So he's perhaps thinking about the Rohirrim.
Yeah.
Yes.
Gandalf is a very thoughtful wizard. Thinks of many things.
Yes, indeed.
So what we're coming into now is, in terms of how the score was written, this is probably one of the longest compositions.
Just before we get too far into this, Jim, I do want to point out that a few scenes ago with Sam and Frodo was another statement of a Ring Quest themed dangerous passes that was not used in the film.
Yes.
It is on the album. So apologies, but before we got too far away from that. So
No,
back to
no
the
problem
Rohirrim
at all. So we've talked about how Howard Shore writes sort of tremendously long compositions, which although they don't necessarily appear that way in the film, that's the way they're notated. And this piece is massive. It must be a good sort of 30 minutes of music and hundreds of bars.
Typing that in right now.
Some alternates for some of this as well.
Yeah, there's a different, there's a slightly more mysterious opening to this, I think, when they first pan up to the mountain.
Alternate departure as well, right?
There is an alternate departure as well. A few other little snippets as well. A few little bits moved around internally. We do start to get a little bit more of the Paths of the Dead material here as well.
We do.
There we are.
There's some another sort of unique instrument to come up here, although it is something that Howard's used in a couple of scores, but some hanging gongs that's used for these hollow metal clangorous sounds. She thought of as being similar to empty armor in a way, so appropriate for the Army of the Dead.
This is some very quiet, ghostly male choral writing in there as well. Another Cinder in text, which is the way is shut.
All these armies keep child-sized armor around.
Merry gets his own little theme to go with it as well.
Yes.
Really?
Yeah, no, there's a little theme for Mary the Warrior, which pops up a couple of times in the extended version.
Yes. They're all worried she's going to try to make that stew again.
There is
Matthew
a lot
says
more
that
of
he
that.
loves hearing more of the Paths of the Dead music and the complete recordings. Yes, indeed.
Yeah, there is
quite a bit more.
a lot more in the extended cut.
It's the does that imply there was a lot of editing happening? Maybe more so just dialing things out than editing would sort of imply that there was a bit of chopping and moving around.
Yeah,
Some of this is just things not being used.
I think some of the Paths of the Dead material was written quite late in comparison to the scenes around it. That may have just been for visual effects reasons.
Yeah.
There was a little more of the Paths of the Dead material under that sequence there just before Aragorn wakes up.
Yes. Paths of the Dead features a lot of male voices, but in a very different style of singing than what we heard in Moria. This is more stretched out, long horizontal lines, a lot of emphasis on diminished harmonies, which is sort of what we think of as an old-fashioned sound, and not not that ancient type of sound, but more specific to Western music period. But he found a way to sort of re-enliven that harmony, which is fantastic.
Yeah, there was some speculation before The Return of the King came out that Howard Shore would concentrate more on using male vocalists in this film, although ultimately he didn't go as far in that direction as he may have once intended.
Yeah, there was some thought. I think he was at one point considering using a male vocalist for the end credits song. They were thinking that it would be a way to sort of change up what they had done in the last couple of end credits pieces. And they did have some people in mind, but ultimately decided that it would make sense to stick with a female voice and have Annie Lennox perform.
Wow. I can't imagine that being any different.
It would have been quite a bit different, as a matter of fact, yeah. And they had some distinct ideas about it, but I think they were obviously all quite happy with the way that things turned out.
And of course, Annie Lennox didn't just record Into the West. She did record at least one other song as well, which we will talk about tomorrow.
Oh, really? Wow, save those surprises. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
And she didn't record just one version of Into the West either.
There's yet another little statement of the Paths of the Dead material that didn't make it to the final mix. I think they were just trying to keep that back to the actual sequence itself. There's quite a few different variations of the sequence as well, just in terms of the variation between the Rivendell material and the Gondor material.
Mm-hmm.
So some versions only using the Gondor material, some just the Rivendell, and others that use a little bit of both.
It's an interesting study in point of view again. Is this scene about receiving Narsil or about giving Narsil? What's the dramatic emphasis here? And ultimately, I guess it's about both, or at least according to the music. That's probably why it works.
There is another new choral text in there as well, which is Andoril.
Yes. This was more of the music that was recorded in early September of 2003.
I think the score may have the most new choral texts. That's the one thing I haven't. That's the one thing I haven't counted up. But,
no, but I do think you're right, and I'm remembering that from having to figure out how to fit them all in to the book. Just the formatting was difficult. We took great care and worked with a wonderful layout artist, Gary Day Ellison, but to really sort of showcase the imagery from these films, stills, but more importantly, the sketches from Alan Lee, John Howe. And the way we presented the choral lyrics, the poetry, was sort of part of that. We wanted there to be a certain, physical elegance about the way things were laid out. I think I mentioned we did have an entire layout of this book before Gary came on to work with us. And what a fortunate circumstance that was. It seemed like a tragedy that threw out an entire layout. But boy, he really brought something entirely different and just a whole other level of elegance and beauty to what we were trying to do. So if those that have found this to be a nice looking book, that is all due to Gary. He's a genius. Oh, here's a good question. So there was an instrument built for Dermot to play in these passages, a double fiddle, which was basically a fiddle with 8 strings on it, 4 strings that you could play on and 4 strings that were resonating strings. And the question from Twitter, has anybody else started to use the double fiddle for anything since it was built for this score? And the answer is, I don't think so. Certainly not that has been advertised publicly. I think that instrument may have been built for Return of the King, used for Return of the King, and that was it. That's its existence. And I do not think there has been any effort made to replicate that for live performances or anything like that. I think they just go with normal fiddle sounds.
So
it's such a unique instrument.
A uniquely warped version of the Fellowship theme.
Yeah, that was the statement of the Fellowship theme. It's sort of compressed down to a half step instead of a whole step. And Howard turned to the orchestra before they performed that passage and said, "Doug's gonna love this one." And then 1, 2, ready, go. I'm sure I was red as a beet after that, but thrilled at the same time.
I was slightly incorrect with my Paths of the Dead choral texts earlier. The text we heard earlier was the Dim Holt Road and not The Way Is Shut.
Correct. The Way Is Shut is coming up soon here, but
it is.
Dim Holt Road was, yeah. We have to get to the door before The Way Is Shut, I suppose.
And we hear some material in this scene that we've not heard since Boromir's death.
Yeah, a little callback, exactly right.
Really? The overall message of Tolkien's narrative is encapsulated beautifully in this dialogue between uncle and niece. No more despair. I would see you smile again. It's almost as if Professor Tolkien were telling the whole world that.
Yeah, this is a great example of how Eowyn's relationships with other characters are so important while she never surrenders or loses her own identity at the same time. Getting into the paths of the dead here.
This is one of those rare times when Legolas has a lot of exposition.
True, yeah. He's more an elf of action than of words, I suppose, at least in these films. You can hear that the harmonies in here are very unique to the Paths of the Dead. This is not the sort of harmonic writing that Howard does really any place else in the Lord of the Rings scores. And Cliff, this was all on location, right? I think they actually found someplace that replicated that path just the way just the way we wanted. Excuse me.
Yes, from what I remember, that was all on the South Island.
Okay.
I wonder about these strange glyphs over the door.
Hmm.
Hmm.
It's another great preparing for battle composition, but done in a very different way, partially because of the motion of the scene. Preparing for battle at Helm's Deep is a lot different than, climbing onto horseback and riding to war. It's a different type of scoring here, of course.
One of our very observant people in the YouTube chat has said that original Peter Jackson fans will remember that the doorway to the Paths of the Dead was actually a physical location for Dead Alive, one of Peter's earlier zombie splatter films.
Yes, was that not where they found the Sumatran rat monkey?
Bingo. You got it.
There is a very different version of this composition on the rarities, which is
that's what I was
checking
referring
out.
to. Yeah, yeah, it's a cool piece. Although this is pretty fantastic as well. This statement here. So again, we're having some Lydian writing. Lydian being another mode, old church mode, but that's the type of writing that, again, becomes more prevalent in the Fourth Age of Middle Earth. So
yeah.
Another action that's sort of looking ahead.
And everyone now is marching in 5 again.
Yes, yeah, it's a sort of diegetic quote of the 5-beat pattern. There's some of that in the Hobbit films too, which of course draws everything into question of, do these characters know their own themes? This music seems to exist someplace in Middle Earth. Would marching to a 5/4 beat be an absolute mess? Yeah, I think it would. Although I'm sure some drum corps somewhere has done a version of Mars or something like that. So I guess just every 2 bars you remember what foot you're on.
There's, in this extended version of this scene, Legolas gets more direct dialogue